The Buried Truth, Chapter 1, The Call from the Past. The late afternoon sun, diffused by the perpetually misty Seattle air, cast a gentle, silver light across Evelyn's impeccably organized living room. At 60, Evelyn carried herself with an air of quiet confidence. A successful architect who had built her life with meticulous precision, brick by emotional brick. Her home, a testament to minimalist design, reflected her desire for order, a subtle counterpoint to the quiet chaos that had always simmered beneath the surface of her childhood memories. Evelyn had grown up in a small, conservative town in rural Georgia, a place where appearances were everything and whispers could ruin a family's reputation overnight. 40 years ago, when Evelyn was a bright, questioning teenager, a profound tragedy had struck her family. Her Aunt Beatrice, her mother's younger sister, had died. Beatrice, vibrant and effervescent, a free spirit in a town that valued conformity, had been Evelyn's confidant, her only true escape. The official story, whispered with hushed reverence, was a short, incurable illness. Evelyn remembered the funeral with a chilling clarity. It was swift, almost clandestine. The coffin remained closed, a detail that had always nagged at her. Her grandmother, the matriarch, a woman of unyielding will and rigid adherence to propriety, had orchestrated everything with a chilling efficiency. Any questions Evelyn dared to ask about Beatrice's sudden decline, about the lack of hospital visits, about the unusual speed of the burial, were met with sharp, dismissive looks and terse commands to respect the dead. Beatrice's name quickly became taboo, a ghost in the family's carefully constructed narrative. Evelyn carried the weight of that unspoken grief, that unresolved mystery, for decades, a quiet ache in her soul. One typical Tuesday evening, as Evelyn was preparing a light dinner, her phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number from a rural Georgia area code. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something compelled her to answer. "Hello, is this Evelyn Hayes?" A calm, professional female voice asked. "Yes, speaking." "My name is Sarah Jensen, and I'm a nurse at the Willow Creek Psychiatric Hospital. I apologize for contacting you out of the blue, but we have a patient here who has been calling your name. She's a long-term resident, an older woman. In her clearer moments, she sometimes mentions an Evelyn and a specific old address in Georgia." The nurse paused, her voice softening. "We've done some research. Your old address matches, and the patient's name is Beatrice Smith." Evelyn's breath hitched. Her hand trembled, sending a tremor through the phone. Beatrice Smith. Her Aunt Beatrice. It was impossible. Beatrice was dead. She had seen the obituary. She had attended the funeral. I think you have the wrong person," Evelyn stammered, her mind reeling. "My Aunt Beatrice passed away almost 40 years ago, in Georgia, from an illness." "I understand your confusion, Miss Hayes," the nurse replied gently, her voice full of an almost unsettling understanding. "But this patient, Beatrice Smith, has been with us for 39 years. She was admitted in 1985. She exhibits classic symptoms of schizophrenia, but she has periods of lucidity. And when she's lucid, she consistently refers to you. We've exhausted all other avenues to find living relatives. You're the only connection we've found." The nurse then recounted specific details, a unique vocal tic Beatrice had, a particular phrase she used to express frustration, a childhood nickname only Evelyn would remember. Each detail was a hammer blow, shattering Evelyn's carefully constructed reality. This wasn't a mistake. This was Beatrice, her vibrant, loving aunt, who had been buried 4 decades ago, was alive, and she was in a psychiatric hospital, seemingly forgotten by the world, remembered only by a dedicated nurse and the fractured echoes of a hidden past. The buried truth had just clawed its way to the surface, demanding to be unearthed. Chapter 2: The Haunted Corridor. The phone call from Willow Creek Psychiatric Hospital plunged Evelyn into a maelstrom of shock, disbelief, and a profound, chilling sense of betrayal. Her Aunt Beatrice, alive? Not dead from some mysterious illness, but locked away for almost 40 years? The image of the closed casket, the hurried funeral, her grandmother's stony silence, it all coalesced into a terrifying, undeniable truth. Her family had lied. A monumental, life-altering lie, woven from fear and shame. Evelyn immediately called her best friend, Linda, a fiercely loyal and practical woman. Linda listened, her initial skepticism replaced by a grim resolve as Evelyn recounted the nurse's precise details. "You have to go, Ev," Linda urged, her voice firm. "You have to know. For Beatrice, for yourself." The flight from Seattle to Georgia felt interminable, each mile amplifying Evelyn's anxiety. Her mind raced, replaying fragmented memories from that summer of 1985. Beatrice, always so full of life, had seemed withdrawn. Her laughter, usually so bright, had faded. There had been whispered conversations between her grandmother and mother, hushed tones that ceased abruptly when Evelyn entered the room. The air in their home had been thick with unspoken tension, a heavy silence that pressed down on Evelyn, even as a teenager. She rented a car at the small airport and drove through familiar Georgia countryside, the landscape a haunting echo of her youth. The town hadn't changed much. Time moved slower here. The hospital, Willow Creek, was nestled on a sprawling, somewhat dilapidated property, its red brick buildings appearing old and imposing, almost like a relic from a forgotten era. Inside, the scent of antiseptic and old paper permeated the air. The reception area was quiet, almost eerily so. Dr. Henderson, a kind-faced woman with intelligent, empathetic eyes, greeted Evelyn. "Thank you for coming, Miss Hayes. Beatrice has been agitated since our call to you, but also hopeful." Dr. Henderson led Evelyn down a long, quiet corridor. The walls, once cream, were now a faded yellow. The air was heavy with unspoken stories. Beatrice was admitted in 1985, Dr. Henderson explained softly. She was suffering from acute psychosis, likely schizophrenia, exacerbated by a very difficult childbirth experience. Her family brought her here. They stated she had no living relatives, and a few weeks later, they filed papers to declare her deceased. It was a common practice back then, especially in conservative communities, to disappear family members with mental illness. The stigma was immense. A difficult childbirth experience. The words hung in the air, cold and stark. Evelyn's heart seized. Childbirth? Beatrice had a child? She never knew. Her grandmother, in her ruthless pursuit of family honor, had buried not only Beatrice's existence, but also the existence of her child. They reached a room with a window overlooking a small enclosed garden. Beatrice sat in a chair, staring out, her back to them. Her hair was thin and white, her shoulders slumped. The vibrant, laughing Beatrice of Evelyn's memories was gone, replaced by a frail, elderly woman. "Beatrice," Dr. Henderson said gently, "you have a visitor. Evelyn is here." Beatrice slowly turned, her eyes, clouded with years of illness, fixed on Evelyn. For a moment, there was nothing but confusion. Then, a flicker, a spark, recognition. "Evelyn?" Her voice was raspy, aged, but the cadence, the very intonation, was undeniably her aunt's. "My sweet Evelyn, you came." Tears streamed down Evelyn's face. She rushed forward, embracing her aunt, a woman she had mourned for decades, a woman now fragile and broken, but undeniably alive. The embrace was tentative at first, then firm, as if both were clinging to a lifeline. The haunted corridor seemed to hold its breath, witnessing a reunion born from a devastating lie, a buried truth finally coming to light. The silence of the past had finally been broken, and its echoes would reverberate with the pain of what had been lost. Chapter 3: Fragments of Memory. The first few days at Willow Creek were a blur of raw emotion for Evelyn. Meeting Beatrice again, seeing the fragile woman her vibrant aunt had become, was both a profound comfort and a searing pain. Beatrice, in her moments of lucidity, recognized Evelyn, recalling snippets of their shared past, a specific game they played as children, a secret hiding spot, a phrase only they knew. These were precious, fleeting moments, often interrupted by the fog of her illness, when Beatrice would retreat into herself, her eyes distant and unseeing. Dr. Henderson was a guiding light, patiently explaining Beatrice's condition and the tragic circumstances of her admission. She was admitted in 1985, the doctor reiterated. She was experiencing severe postpartum psychosis, a very serious mental health condition that can manifest after childbirth. In her case, it led to paranoia, delusions, and a complete break from reality. Her family, terrified and ashamed, made the decision to institutionalize her and declare her deceased. The revelation of Beatrice having given birth pierced Evelyn's heart with a fresh wave of grief and anger. A child. Beatrice had a child, her cousin. All these years, Evelyn had never known the sheer brutality of her grandmother's decision, not only to bury Beatrice alive, but also to separate a mother from her newborn son, was monstrous. "Was it a boy or a girl?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. "A boy," Dr. Henderson confirmed softly. "He was born here, at the hospital attached to the institution, just weeks before Beatrice was admitted. He was given to his father's family, as we understand it. His father was a local man, but he vanished shortly after the birth. The family, your grandmother, took the baby and said his mother died in childbirth. They moved away soon after." Evelyn's mind raced. A local man. Her grandmother's fierce determination to uphold appearances. It all made a terrible, coherent sense. Shame, fear of scandal, and a rigid adherence to societal norms had driven her grandmother to commit this unspeakable act. Evelyn, driven by an urgent need to uncover the full truth and to find her hidden cousin, began to delve into her family's past with renewed vigor. She called her mother, hesitant at first, then resolute. Her mother, now elderly and frail, was initially evasive, her voice tight with residual fear. But Evelyn pressed, gently but firmly, unraveling the decades of silence. Her mother, through tears and whispers, confirmed the devastating truth. "Your grandmother, she was so afraid, Evelyn, of the talk, of the shame. Beatrice wasn't married, and a child out of wedlock, and her mind, it just snapped. Your grandmother thought she was protecting us all. She believed Beatrice was beyond help. She spoke of the young, naive man who was the father, who had indeed vanished after learning of Beatrice's condition, and the baby. The family, wanting to erase any trace of the scandal, arranged for the baby to be quietly sent away, adopted by distant relatives, or simply taken in by another family who would raise him as their own. His name was James, her mother finally confessed, a name Evelyn had never heard associated with her family. Your grandmother arranged for him to be raised by a cousin in another state. They were told his mother died. The weight of this new secret, this buried life, pressed down on Evelyn. She had a cousin, a first cousin, who had been raised without his mother, believing she was dead, all because of a family's desperate attempt to hide a truth steeped in shame. The fragments of memory from her own youth, the whispered secrets, the abrupt changes in conversation, the air of tension, now clicked into place, forming a horrifying, complete picture. The haunted corridor of Willow Creek was not just a place of confinement. It was a silent testament to a family's profound betrayal, a truth buried deep, but now fiercely demanding to be heard. Evelyn knew what she had to do. She had to find James. Chapter 4. The Unearthing of James. Finding James was Evelyn's new pressing mission. The thought of her cousin, living a life built on a lie, resonated deeply with her own experience of being denied the truth about Beatrice. She knew the pain of unanswered questions, of a missing piece in her personal history. James deserved to know his mother, however fractured Beatrice's reality might be. Evelyn started with the sparse information her mother had provided, a first name, James, and a vague mention of a cousin in another state who had supposedly adopted him. Her mother had very little other detail, a testament to her grandmother's meticulous secrecy. Evelyn, using her own resources and a discreet private investigator, began to piece together the fragments. She delved into old family records, birth certificates, and obituaries. She tracked down distant relatives, navigating a web of evasive answers and faded memories. It was a painstaking process, like trying to reconstruct a shattered vase from dust. Eventually, a faint trail emerged, leading to a small town in rural Kentucky. There, an obituary for a distant cousin, a woman Evelyn vaguely remembered from childhood family gatherings, mentioned a beloved son, James. The puzzle pieces began to fit. The cousin had moved away from Georgia shortly after Beatrice's institutionalization, taking James with her, raising him as her own, fulfilling a dark family pact to keep the truth buried. Evelyn found James through online public records. He was now in his early 40s, a successful engineer, living in a quiet suburb of Louisville, Kentucky. His online presence showed a seemingly stable, happy life, a wife, 2 children, a well-kept home. To disrupt that world, to shatter his fundamental understanding of his own origins, felt like a monumental, almost cruel act. But Evelyn knew, with a certainty that transcended fear, that it was also an act of profound necessity and love. She reached out to James via a carefully worded letter, introducing herself as a distant relative from Georgia, mentioning a shared family history she felt he should know. She avoided specifics, wanting to deliver the truth in person with compassion. James, intrigued and perhaps a little wary, agreed to meet her for coffee. The meeting was tense. James was a man of quiet intelligence, with a reserved demeanor that hinted at a deep-seated introspection. He listened politely as Evelyn spoke of their shared lineage, of the town in Georgia, of family stories. Then, Evelyn took a deep breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. "James," she began, her voice soft but steady. "There's something you need to know about your birth, about your mother." His polite expression subtly shifted, a flicker of apprehension, then a familiar guardedness crossed his face. "My mother died in childbirth," he stated, his voice flat. "That's what I was always told." "That's the story your family told you," Evelyn corrected gently. "But it wasn't the truth, James. Your biological mother, my Aunt Beatrice, didn't die. She was alive. She still is." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. James stared at her, his face draining of all color. "What are you talking about?" His voice was a strained whisper, laced with disbelief. My mother adopted me. She told me her sister died. Your biological mother, Beatrice, was very ill after your birth," Evelyn explained, choosing her words carefully, avoiding clinical terms. "She had a severe mental illness. Your grandmother, my grandmother, was terrified of the stigma, of the shame. She made a terrible decision. She sent Beatrice away to a psychiatric hospital and told everyone, including you, that she had died. You were raised by your adoptive mother, my cousin, as a secret to protect the family name." James's reaction was explosive. Rage, confusion, and raw pain warred on his face. "You're lying," he roared, slamming his hand on the table. "My entire life, a lie? My mother? She would never." His voice broke. Evelyn met his gaze, her own eyes filled with sorrow and unwavering truth. "I know it's a lot to take in, James. I understand your anger. I felt it too. But I've met Beatrice. She's at Willow Creek Hospital in Georgia. She's an old woman now, ill, but she's alive, and she's your mother." She pulled out a faded photo of a young, radiant Beatrice. "This is her, James. Your mother." He looked at the photo, then back at Evelyn, his eyes haunted. The resemblance was undeniable, a subtle mirroring of features, a ghost of an expression. The carefully constructed world of James's life, built on decades of silence and a monstrous lie, was shattering before his very eyes. The buried truth had found its way out, and its unearthing would reshape not only Evelyn's future, but James's as well. Chapter 5. The Unveiling. James's initial reaction to Evelyn's revelation was a maelstrom of emotions: denial, searing anger, profound confusion. He left the coffee shop abruptly, leaving Evelyn alone with the wreckage of his shattered world. She understood. Her own world had been similarly upended. She gave him space, waiting, hoping he would process the devastating truth. Days turned into a week. Evelyn returned to Willow Creek, spending more time with Beatrice. Her aunt, in her moments of clarity, seemed to sense a shift, a softening of the air around them. She would occasionally speak of a baby, a fleeting, wistful look in her eyes, a shadow of the son she had lost. Then a call from James. His voice was hoarse, subdued. "I've been doing some research," he said, the anger replaced by a fragile vulnerability. "Old family records, census data. It lines up. My mother, she always told me she was adopted. She just never said it was by her aunt and that her real mother was alive. She must have known some of it, or suspected. She was always so secretive about her past." His voice was filled with a chilling awe. "It's true, isn't it? She's really my mother." "Yes, James," Evelyn confirmed gently. "She is. I need to see her," he whispered, a desperate plea in his voice. I need to know. The drive to Willow Creek with James was heavy with unspoken anxieties. He was quiet, his face set, his gaze fixed on the passing landscape. Evelyn spoke of Beatrice's gentle nature, her love for art, the snippets of memory that still surfaced. She tried to prepare him for the reality of Beatrice's illness, the fragmented moments of clarity amidst the fog. They entered the familiar corridor of Willow Creek. The air felt thick with anticipation. Dr. Henderson, alerted to their arrival, met them, her expression grave but hopeful. Beatrice was in the garden, sketching in a worn notebook. She looked up as they approached, her eyes unfocused. Then slowly, tentatively, she focused on James. He stood frozen, unable to move, staring at the woman who was his mother, a woman he had believed dead his entire life. "Beatrice," Evelyn said softly, her voice filled with a profound emotion. "This is James, your son." Beatrice's eyes, usually clouded, suddenly cleared. A powerful, unmistakable spark of recognition flared in their depths. Her mouth trembled. She reached out a frail, trembling hand. My boy?" Her voice was a choked whisper, filled with a raw, primal love. "My sweet boy?" James, overwhelmed, fell to his knees beside her, tears streaming down his face. He grasped her outstretched hand, clutching it as if it were a lifeline. "Mom," he sobbed, burying his face in her lap. "Mom." Beatrice stroked his hair, a faint ethereal smile gracing her lips. For that brief, miraculous moment, the illness receded. She was a mother, reunited with her lost son. It was a profound, heartbreaking unveiling, a moment of raw, untainted truth. The secret, buried for 40 years, had finally shattered, unleashing a torrent of long-suppressed emotions. The subsequent days were a delicate dance of reconnection. James spent hours with Beatrice, showing her pictures of his own children, her grandchildren. She responded with flashes of recognition, small smiles, and a deep, quiet contentment. He learned about her life in the asylum, the kind nurses, her passion for drawing. He began to understand the depth of his family's sacrifice, born out of a misguided sense of shame. Evelyn, watching the tender reunion, felt a profound sense of closure. She had honored Beatrice, given her back her son. The heavy weight of the unspoken sorrow she had carried for decades began to lift. She knew this wasn't a miraculous cure for Beatrice, but it was a crucial step towards healing, not just for her, but for James, and for the buried soul of Beatrice herself. The silence had been broken, and in its place, a complex, fragile symphony of truth and love began to play. Chapter 6: Threads of Forgiveness. The reunion of Beatrice and James marked the beginning of a profound, albeit challenging, period of healing for all involved. James, having faced the shattering truth of his origins, found himself navigating a landscape of unfamiliar emotions. The initial rage had given way to a deep sadness for his mother's lost years and a complex understanding of the fear and shame that had driven his grandmother's actions. He began to visit Beatrice regularly at Willow Creek, spending quiet hours with her, listening to her fragmented stories, sometimes lucid, sometimes lost in the fog of her illness. He brought her simple gifts: drawing pads, colorful pencils, a small, soft blanket. He learned to appreciate the small moments of connection, the gentle squeeze of her hand, the flicker of recognition in her eyes, the rare, clear, "my boy." He introduced his own children to their grandmother, a fragile, beloved figure in a quiet room, whose story would forever be woven into the tapestry of their family. Evelyn, having fulfilled her promise to Beatrice and facilitated the reunion, found a new purpose. The bitter resentment she had harbored against her grandmother and the family's complicity began to soften. She understood that their actions, while devastating, were born of a desperate fear in a time when mental illness was demonized and stigmatized. It wasn't an excuse, but it offered a path towards a nuanced understanding, if not full forgiveness. She channeled her energy into advocating for mental health awareness, particularly focusing on the historical injustices faced by individuals with mental illness and their families. Evelyn shared Beatrice's story, albeit anonymously at first, in online forums and support groups. Her powerful narrative resonated with countless others who had similar family secrets, helping to dismantle the shame and stigma surrounding mental health. She spoke of the importance of truth, compassion, and acceptance, urging families to choose honesty over secrecy. The relationship between Evelyn and James deepened. They were no longer just distant cousins. They were united by a shared history, by the same lost mother, and by the courage to face a painful truth. They often discussed Beatrice's care, sharing the burden and the quiet joys of her presence. James, with his engineering mind, even researched better facilities and treatments, ensuring Beatrice received the best possible care within her limitations. Beatrice herself, though her condition remained chronic, seemed to find a quiet peace in the consistent presence of her son and Evelyn. The knowledge that she was remembered, loved, and no longer hidden brought a gentle calm to her days. Her artwork, once sporadic, became more frequent, her sketches often filled with flowers and sunlight, a reflection of the light that had finally broken through her long darkness. One sunny afternoon, Evelyn sat with Beatrice in the Willow Creek garden. Beatrice was lucid, her gaze clear and steady. She reached for Evelyn's hand. "Thank you, Evelyn," she whispered, her voice surprisingly strong. "Thank you for bringing him back, for seeing me." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. "Always, Aunt Beatrice, always." The journey was far from over. There would be no magical cure for Beatrice, no complete restoration of a lost past. But the truth, once buried by shame and fear, had blossomed into a fragile, beautiful reality. Evelyn had found not just her lost aunt, but also a deeper understanding of forgiveness and the profound courage it takes to heal. James had found his mother, his roots, and a new understanding of love. The family, once fractured by a devastating lie, was now slowly, painstakingly reweaving its threads, creating a new tapestry of acceptance, compassion, and the enduring power of truth. The buried truth had not destroyed them. It had, in fact, set them free, allowing light to finally shine on decades of silent suffering. Chapter 7. A legacy of light years turned into a decade since Evelyn received that life-altering call from Willow Creek. Beatrice, in her quiet room overlooking the garden, eventually passed away peacefully at the age of 80, surrounded by the love of Evelyn and James. Her death, unlike her first one, was acknowledged, mourned, and honored with dignity. Her life, once erased, was now remembered, a testament to Evelyn's courage and love. Beatrice's passing, though sad, brought a sense of completion, a final chapter to a long and painful story. Evelyn arranged a memorial service, not a clandestine burial, but an open, heartfelt gathering in a small chapel near Willow Creek. James and his family were there, along with Evelyn's mother, now frail, but finally at peace with the family's past. Evelyn spoke of Beatrice's vibrant spirit, her artistic talent, and the extraordinary circumstances of her life, acknowledging the profound impact of mental illness and the painful choices made out of fear. It was a raw, honest eulogy that resonated deeply with all present, a public shedding of the shame that had clung to their family for so long. Evelyn, now in her early 70s, had fully embraced her role as an advocate. Her personal story, once a private anguish, became a powerful tool for change. She collaborated with mental health organizations, sharing her experiences at conferences and in online forums. Her narrative helped to dismantle the stigma surrounding mental illness, encouraging open conversations and pushing for more compassionate, ethical treatment for patients and their families. She emphasized that secrecy and shame only perpetuate suffering, and that truth, however difficult, is the ultimate path to healing. James, Beatrice's son, continued to be a strong presence in Evelyn's life. Their bond, forged in the crucible of shared discovery, remained unbreakable. He honored his mother's memory by becoming a passionate supporter of mental health initiatives, particularly those focused on postpartum psychosis and early intervention. His children, now young adults, understood their grandmother's story, carrying it as a legacy of resilience and the transformative power of acceptance. They found immense pride in their grandmother's quiet artistry and in their great-grandmother's strength, even if misguided. Evelyn often reflected on the profound journey she had undertaken. She had lived for decades with a silent sorrow, a nagging feeling that something was deeply wrong with her family's past. The phone call, the initial shock, the painful unveiling of truth had all been tumultuous. But facing the buried truth, however agonizing, had liberated her. It had brought her not only her lost aunt, but also a new, cherished family in James and his children. It had allowed her to understand, and perhaps even forgive, the fear that had driven her grandmother's actions. Her home in Seattle, once a meticulously ordered sanctuary against a chaotic past, now felt warmer, more vibrant, filled with the light of honesty and the echoes of a truth long denied. She looked at old photographs of a young, smiling Beatrice, no longer with a sense of unresolved grief, but with a quiet peace. Beatrice's story was no longer a buried shame. It was a testament to the enduring power of love, the importance of truth, and the incredible courage it takes to bring light into the darkest corners of family history. Evelyn had not just uncovered a secret. She had unearthed a legacy of compassion, healing, and an unwavering belief in the human capacity for renewal. The buried truth had finally brought them all a profound, lasting peace.